Hi, I'm Mike, and welcome to Red Cell Confidential. This podcast is about using guerrilla tactics to attack social injustice and to win the hearts and minds of the people in our local communities, which is exactly where social revolutions take root. Now, if you're ready to take action, the kind of action that actually produces results, then stay tuned. Alrighty then. This week we're going to start talking about intelligence, or intel. We'll focus less on the methodology and more on what specific types of intelligence we need to gather, on whom, and how to get started. We'll look at the official and the unofficial power structures in our communities and how they might either help or hinder the successful completion of our project or objective. Toward the end, we'll go over a couple of helpful hints for y'all Yankees that come down here to Dixie trying to organize us backward bumpkins. Well, let's get started. Now, the general who wins a battle makes many calculations in his temple where the battle is planned. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Thus, do many calculations lead to victory, and few calculations lead to defeat? How much more so, no calculations at all? That was a quote from The Art of War, a set of guidelines written by a Chinese general, Sun Tzu, about 2,500 years ago, more or less. His advice is as true today as it was then. Now, we've all seen either in the news or as depicted in movies the exploits of what we call the fast movers. You can pick your favorite. Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the British SAS. The stories are similar. A highly organized team of deadly professionals moves in and quickly captures or kills the bad guys, rescues the hostages, or whatever. Compare that to another story we've become all too familiar with. The police SWAT team sweeps in, blows up a door with too much force, damaging the other apartments in the building. Multiple team members start yelling conflicting orders to the frightened and confused occupants. Someone makes a wrong move, and the cops open fire, wounding or killing people. Sometimes women and children. People who turn out to be unarmed, and when the dust settles, someone discovers they've raided the wrong address. Then the ass-covering shit show begins. So why has one group been so successful that they've become legendary, while the other is screwed up enough to become infamous? Well, the sensationalism of the media is partly to blame, but remember what our old Chinese general said. When you hear about or see the operations of the military's fast movers, you don't usually see the hours and hours, days, and often weeks of planning and rehearsal that came before the execution of any operation. You don't see the years of training, testing, and qualification that came before that. What you see even less of is the painstaking and usually classified process of gathering and analyzing the intelligence that the mission planning was based on. Now, our mission is to win, to achieve our objectives and capture the hearts and minds of the people in our community. So we would do well to heed the advice of the old general. I mean, we'd rather be legendary than infamous, right? In all fairness to SWAT teams, there are more successful operations than there are screw-ups, and generally the people on the team want to be heroes, not villains. The real problem is not bad cops, but the fact that there's probably no police force in the country with the time, money, and resources to train its SWAT teams to the same level of precision and professionalism as something like Delta Force. However, in my opinion, if they can't step up, they should step out. I take a very dim view of the militarization of law enforcement anyway. Moving on. Let's talk about the first stage of our operations, Intel. Phase 1. Probably our first order of business is to find an objective. That is, a community problem that we can actually solve, or at least improve. We need to find something that's important enough to really matter to the people we're helping, something that will also solidify our relationship with the community in general. Yet, it needs to be something small enough, simple enough, that we're certain we can achieve our objective. That point is extremely important, especially for our first project with the community. We cannot afford to fail. We must establish an image of being real problem solvers, providing solutions that actually work. It shouldn't be too hard to find such a problem in your community. Do you have homeless people? I'm almost certain that you do. Are they being targeted by local citizens, groups, or politicians? Is law enforcement conducting sweeps to herd them out to even more dire circumstances? Do they have basic survival needs that you might be able to help with? Food, blankets, warm socks? Now that's an actual need among the homeless that most people don't even think about. Now be careful here. Putting together a project to obtain and distribute 200 or 300 pairs of wool and polyester socks is doable. That's a win. That can make a difference, and that can score you some points with your community. And certainly with the people who get the socks. On the other hand, starting a drive to set up a halfway house or a free clinic is not a good choice for an early stage objective. While you may get a lot of supportive lip service, when it comes to actual execution, you're going to run into more roadblocks, backpedaling, and opposition than you can shake a stick at. Watch the news. Use Google search. Talk to people. Talk to already existing groups and charities. Walk around and look. It shouldn't be too hard to find a project that fits the bill. At this point, remember your operational security, your OPSEC. Don't share your plans and start buying trouble before you even get your project off the ground. Don't broadcast your great intentions only to find out that for some reason your project isn't actually doable. You'll lose your credibility and make any future project that much harder to sell. You have a lot more work to do. Phase 2. The next order of business is a little more tricky. Analyzing the local power structure, both official and unofficial. Take a look at your local government, as it is, not as it should be. Who's the head honcho? The mayor? The city manager? The chairman of the Board of County Commissioners? Who runs the various departments under them? Things like zoning, taxes, code compliance, garbage collection, infrastructure like streets, power, water, and sewer. Now, some of these services may be contracted out to private companies, but there will be someone in charge of regulating them. Look at who's in charge of city beautification, law enforcement, the judicial offices, just to name the most obvious. It shouldn't be too difficult to find everything you need right on your computer. Most cities, towns, and counties have a website these days, and you can usually find all the major departments listed and described there, along with a smiling picture of whatever tool is mismanaging them. At this point, if you're a visually oriented person like me, it helps to make yourself a flowchart. It's also useful to have a flowchart when you begin learning how the power actually flows. Who has the most influence in regard to your project? Which departments cooperate in certain circumstances? Which department heads hate each other's guts? Who's likely to support or oppose your project? Who's up for re-election? And who are they up against? Don't freak out on me now. A lot of this stuff you'll build up over time. For now, you mainly want to look for 1. Administrative stuff, like where you need to go to make sure your project doesn't violate any zoning ordinances, or where to get permits if you need them. Anything governmental that may help or hinder your objective. Be as thorough as you can and don't fret too much. I guarantee you're going to miss something. Try to be thorough, but don't drive yourself crazy. 2. You'll also want to investigate whether the local government has any special resources you can use to further your goals. They may already have programs that relate to yours, which might even possibly be of assistance. Even the worst government organizations will have something going on that at least gives the appearance that they're concerned about the community. Now 3. Get a broad overview of law enforcement. What's their general attitude and demeanor? How have they responded to things like what you're planning in the past, if at all? How did they respond when things went smoothly? How did they respond when things went badly? How do the local police and the specific neighborhood you'll be working in relate to each other? While you're at it, don't forget satellite offices of state and federal government. You know, state police, Department of Corrections, Children and Family Services, and so on. Now, phase 3. If that's not enough, you also want to look at the local NGOs. That's non-governmental organizations. I'm talking about the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, local outreach programs run by churches, any group or organization that might impact your project by helping out with their resources or their connections. A lot of universities will have extensions or programs going on in your area, especially in the fields of agriculture and environment. They're usually more than willing to provide you with a certain level of help and lots of information. Don't forget the other organizations like the Invisible Empire of the Ku Klux Klan, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, or similar knuckleheads that might take offense at what you're doing. Then there's that most insidious den of evildoers, the local Chamber of Commerce. Don't forget about them. Don't forget about local media. Not everything happens on YouTube. Local radio, TV, and newspapers can also play a significant role in your project, positive or negative, depending on how you handle them. There's one more nexus of power we want to take a look at before launching a project. That is, existing community leaders. They can either be a help, a hindrance, or they can be irrelevant. But you should have an idea of who they are, who follows them. These might include the local head of the NAACP or the minister of the largest Baptist church in town or another activist with a following. It might also include the local wardspersons of the major political parties or the spokespersons for the MAGA morons and the Q-tips. Don't let yourself get blindsided by these folks. You may think some of them are a joke. Underestimating any of them is a grave mistake. Now let's go over a couple of little operational reminders here, because all of this may seem a little overwhelming. Pace yourself. Start out researching what would seem to be the most relevant things to your objective, the specific problem that you're attacking, but keep collecting intelligence as you go along. Eventually, you're going to want all of this information in your toolkit. There's some things you can't do from your computer at home. You'll have to get out and do some recon or reconnaissance. That means making observations, maybe even talking to people that you don't like at all. Remember your OPSEC guidelines. Don't get into a confrontation. Don't cause a ruckus. And don't attract attention. Get the information you need while keeping low-key, unobtrusive. It takes patience and forethought. Also, do not entertain any notion of going undercover to gather information. Remember, you're an activist or organizer who's just trying to maintain a low profile. You are not some kind of trained operative. You're not even close. Don't let yourself fall into that fantasy, because you will almost certainly fuck it up and get caught. You can easily wind up in jail, the hospital, or even the graveyard. Ignore this advice at your own peril. Now, I promised you a little advice about working in the South, especially when you're new to Dixie. First of all, down here, it's not what you know, it's who you know that counts. Business is done more on the basis of relationships than it is on qualifications. So those relationships you build or destroy while gathering intelligence and organizing are going to either make you or break you. Furthermore, if you are not born and raised in one of the former Confederate states, you are generally seen as a Yankee. And there's nothing we Southerners despise more than some Yankee trash trying to tell us how we ought to do things, or how you do things up north, even if you happen to be right. Alrighty. Once more, we've barely skimmed the surface of Intel, but I think this is enough to give you a running start and help you become a much more effective activist and organizer. In any case, you certainly won't run out of things to do. Next week, we'll start talking about the second objective of our overall mission building, our team. The lone wolf is a popular American myth. You don't really find them in the wild. Wolves work in packs. If you try to operate as a lone wolf, well, that's romantic, but you won't achieve a whole lot or be very effective. And you'll be extremely limited in what projects you can take on, what objectives you can successfully achieve. So, building a team, the right team, is pretty important. That's it for this segment of the episode. Backtalk is up next. Welcome back to the second segment of this episode of Red Cell Confidential. Well, the show's running a little long this week. I've blathered on a little more than usual talking about intelligence. So we'll just cut it short and I'll give you a break. Hope to see you again next week. Thanks for tuning in to Red Cell Confidential. I hope you've learned something from this week's episode. I really hope you get out of your easy chair and take what you've learned to the streets. Remember, it's all just dreams and hot air till you put your boots on the ground and your ideas into action. If you like the show, subscribe, hit the like button. It really will help me keep this thing on the air. And I'd love to hear your questions and comments. You know the routine. I'll be back next week with more guerrilla tactics and outside-the-box ideas about giving power to the powerless. Until next time, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Solidarity.